Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and what I want to talk about today is sort of the differences between client-side rendering, server-side rendering, and static deployment. The reason being is because right now I'm kind of in the midst of learning Gatsby. Gatsby is sort of a cool overlay on React with GraphQL, and I'll get more into what Gatsby is in a moment. But essentially, if you're in the React world, and there's equivalents in Vue and Angular, etc., you're faced with this conundrum, okay? These frameworks were originally created for client-side rendering. The reason being is that there are different pros and cons to having your website rendered at different points. And once upon a time, again, you just had basic static HTML websites. You just put everything in the HTML, the data was in the HTML, and then you styled it with CSS, and what was there. Okay, this made it really easy for search engines to search your website and crawl your website and do search engine optimization because all the data was there laid out semantically and all that good stuff. But it was a pain to update them because you'd have to do everything manually, update multiple pages, and then each individual page rendered separately. So it was just a lot more work. And then the websites weren't overly interactive because we're just too busy coding large tables of data and whatnot. Okay. Then you kind of had backends where now you could do all sorts of really cool stuff where you could now store information in a database and play with the information and morph the information and then take that information and generate the HTML on the fly. So instead of sitting there saying have this set HTML file with the data kind of set in place, the server could sit there, grab all the data that it needs and then plop it into a template. And you would use like a templating engine, such as like a EJS, handlebars, mustache, pug. And basically what you'd be saying is like, here's my HTML file, plop the data in these variables. The server would do it. The pro, you have a much more dynamic website, and basically you're not worried about having to update the website itself, just update the data. And the website kind of is automatically updated. The problem is that the server has to render the page every time an individual makes a request to the server, which means the server's just doing that much more work. And then the user doesn't get the website back until the server's done and actually sends the response, which for huge amounts of data or for a diverse amount of data, that can end up taking longer. And then again, the page is refreshing every time. So I go to the next page, the server has to render that page, pull the data. It can slow down. Although again, from a search engine point of view, the search engine would only see the rendered page from the server, so search engine optimization perspective, it's fine. Then you had the idea of what's called a single page application. Okay, so one of the things we didn't like about client side was we wanted something more dynamic, and also again, either way, whether server side or client side, having the website distributed across multiple pages and having every time you go to another page of the website making a separate request and getting a separate response, resulting in a separate render of the entire page, wasn't for the best experience. You get that flicker every time you change pages. Wouldn't it be nice if it was just one smooth experience going from one place to the next? So you have the idea of a single page application. So the idea was to instead of having the server render the page, we'll grab the data from the server. We'll just let the server handle the data, send it over by creating API endpoints through either GraphQL or normal RESTful routes. And then basically you're grabbing that data that's already been sort of pre-configured, what data is available to you. You pull it, and then you render it on the client, on the browser computer. And this is where Angular, React, Vue come in. So basically you'd have one application, and instead of it being sort of multiple pages, what you're doing is it's all broken down into components. So when you click on a link, it'll use a client-side router that'll say, hey, instead of changing the whole page, just change this component here, this component there when they click on this link. So the whole website isn't rendering. You don't get that flicker. And it basically is going to run a lot faster. Mainly because it's only loading up, because it basically literally grabs the whole website when you first go to the website, and then it doesn't have to re-grab it again, it doesn't have to reload it again, it's there, it's in your RAM. So it's a smoother experience without the flicker, and it's a quicker and faster experience. Although this, since the website the underlying code isn't very semantic and whatnot and clear because everything's being rendered dynamically on the client side. Or one of the original fears was search engine optimization, because will search engines be able to adapt to reading such dynamic code? For the most part, I think that's less of a concern nowadays, but that was one of the main concerns. Well, people really enjoyed the workflow of working with these frameworks, but sometimes they still may want server-side or even static websites. And so that's where basically the conversation we're having today is. So when it comes into the React world, so I'm going to focus on React today. If you're just using plain vanilla React and you're using sort of that starter thing, create React app, you're doing a client-side single page application. So basically you're going to pull your data externally, either through API calls or through other methods, into your single page app, and then just render the data on the client browser. But they've created ways to do other things with React. Okay, there is NextJS. What that does, it allows you to essentially use React as a templating engine. So instead of having React render on the client side, it's going to render on the server side. This way, what information you need to pull is more dynamic. I mean, one of the issues always is with RESTful APIs is that you have to make sure that they're secure, so that way people who you don't want accessing that data, you have to decide which data gets shown out there. So that way, hey, if someone does somehow get access to it, they don't have access to everything. So there's all these things in the design of your API that can limit you, that you don't have to worry about with server-side rendering, because the information was just within the server, so external forces couldn't necessarily just touch it because it's internal to the server application. But it'd be nice to use React, because React has a really cool workflow. So that's what kind of NextJS does. It allows you to bring React into the server-side world and use it to sort of render your pages on the server side with all the same concerns as you would normally have with the server side, in the sense that it's going to have to render the page on every request. And this is where sort of the new world of sort of static page frameworks really kind of is really interesting, because it's not like back in the old days you didn't like static pages because you'd create the static page and it was a pain to update it all the time. But Gatsby kind of takes a new spin on this, and there's a couple other frameworks that do this for a lot of the other frameworks, for Vue, for whatnot. And essentially what it does is you'll create a website. It'll feel like you're creating a dynamic server-side website, in the sense of how you're basically pulling it, configuring all these data sources through different plugins in the Gatsby. So you could say, hey, you know what? We want to be able to use data from Markdown files. We want to use MDX, which is a weird hybrid between Markdown and JSX. We want to pull down from this API. We want to pull from this RSS feed, from this text file, from this Excel spreadsheet, from this Airtable. You can configure through all these plugins and pull in data. And then that data then suddenly becomes accessible through an interface with GraphQL, which is a newer sort of API spec or query language created by Facebook. So instead of having to deal with all these bits of information, you deal with each of them through separate sort of methods. You pull all the information through all these plugins, you configure all the pulling of information, and then what you do is you run queries. You basically, on each page, you'll design a query that'll bring in the information from these sources that are needed for that page. Okay, so everything is still dynamic in the way that it's programmed. But what you do is you'll build the website, it pulls in all that information, and then creates a static page. So it's not going to pull from all these APIs at client-side rendering. So when your traditional React app, you're actually making all those separate AJAX requests at the time that the client brings up the website. Here, it's pulling all that information at the time of build, rendering a static page, which is even faster because your user doesn't have to wait for all these AJAX calls, and then they still have the same experience. So this means you have to make sure you periodically build the website, so that way it's pulling the latest information. But to you, it's still the same workflow. So basically, if you're pulling from, and then this also allows you to create a front end for literally any kind of backend you've used. So for traditional CMSs, which already had a built-in front end like WordPress, you can actually pull in all your WordPress data into Gatsby, and then create a React front end, and just build it when needed. So you could set up some sort of script to build it periodically, or whatever. But basically create a static page as the end result that you can load onto a Netlify or into a Gatsby Cloud or some other sort of static Surge as another static host, and just host the page. So this is really cool. So you still have a site that has the benefits and the user experience of the client-side rendered single-page application, but you're not necessarily making all the data requests at the time, and you can use a rich set data because it's doing all the data query. It's basically pulling all the data at build time, rendering a static page that you just then deploy. So it ends up taking up less speed, it's faster for the user, it's going to be better for search engine optimization because everything is static and kind of set in stone until the next time you build and deploy. But again, you're not necessarily spending a lot of time editing every website every time you want to update the website because you just hit build, it pulls in all the information, it re-renders everything, and churns you out a new static website to deploy, and then again, using a lot of different services like Net on the Fly, GitHub, Gatsby Cloud, a lot of that can even be further abstracted. So that's sort of the big deal with static pages. So when people hear static page generator, it doesn't necessarily mean, oh, this allows you to set a fixed page and you're done. It's a little bit cooler than that. And the pros are a little bit grander than that. So, but again, there are times where you may prefer server-side rendering to have that richer access to the server-side information. And there'll be other times where you want to make sure that the data, especially if it's like a user interacting website where the user is putting in information, they want to see it the minute they put up that information. You're probably going to want client-side rendering and make all the AJAX requests going back and forth, or server-side or client-side rendering, but you're going to want to have that real-time sort of back and forth of information. But if it's just sort of a one direction kind of website where basically you're broadcasting information that might be coming from many different sources, a static website builder like Gatsby's real good. You just hit build on occasion, the website just works. And you've increased the speed by a lot. And then even then, it can be even more dynamic than that. You can still build in a lot of interactivity and still do the traditional AJAX requests back and forth in your HTML and JavaScript, depending on where you put it in your Gatsby setup. So, but the parts that don't need to be dynamic can be static and speed up your website, but still be coming from dynamic information. So it's very cool. I think it's very cool. So have a great day and enjoy. This is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. Check out my website. Make sure to join the networking Slack group. You'll find a link over there at alexmercedcoder.com. Have a great day and enjoy.